Grace sat in the back seat of the car, her fingers clenched tightly around a small handkerchief she hadn't realized she was crushing, her breathing uneven as rain tapped steadily against the window beside her. The wedding dress wrapped carefully around her body suddenly felt heavier than it had just minutes ago, like it carried more than fabric, like it carried every expectation, every prayer, every moment that had led her here. Beside her, her best friend Lauren kept glancing over, her voice gentle but laced with concern. "Grace, talk to me. What's going on? You've been quiet this whole ride." Grace didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed ahead, her chest rising and falling faster than she could control. The driver slowed slightly as they approached the church, the lights glowing in the distance, people already gathering inside, waiting. Lauren reached for her hand. "Hey, this is normal, okay? It's a big day. Cold feet happen. It doesn't mean anything is wrong." Grace finally turned, her eyes filled with something deeper than nerves. "No, this isn't just nerves," she whispered, her voice shaking. Her phone lit up in her lap, Daniel's name flashing across the screen with a simple message. "Are you close?" And suddenly, the air in the car felt too tight to breathe. Grace had spent years imagining this moment, years believing that when it finally came, everything inside her would feel calm, settled, certain. But instead, there was a weight pressing against her chest that refused to lift, a quiet but persistent voice she couldn't explain telling her something wasn't right. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to steady herself, but the moment she did, the images came rushing back again, clearer now than ever. That dream, the one she had tried so hard to forget. She was in a room with no windows, no doors she could open, her hands hitting walls that wouldn't move, her voice calling out with no response. And then that sound, a door slamming somewhere behind her, followed by a voice she didn't recognize but somehow understood. "Run." Her eyes snapped open, and she inhaled sharply. Lauren's grip tightened around her hand. "Grace, you're scaring me. What is it?" Grace shook her head slightly, trying to find the words. "I don't know. Something feels wrong." Lauren frowned, studying her face carefully. "Wrong how?" "With Daniel." The question hung in the air longer than Grace expected, because she didn't have a simple answer. On paper, Daniel Johnson was everything she had prayed for. He was 32, originally from Chicago, now working as a senior financial analyst for a well-known firm in the city. He was respected, disciplined, and carried himself with a confidence that made people trust him almost immediately. When they met at a church networking event nearly a year ago, he stood out in a way that felt effortless, the kind of man who didn't need to say too much to leave an impression. He spoke about his faith openly, shared how important it was to him, and when he started pursuing Grace, it felt intentional, not rushed, not careless. He planned dates, prayed with her, checked in consistently, and made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't there to waste time. For Grace, after years of waiting, of disappointment, of wondering if her time would ever come, Daniel felt like confirmation that God had finally answered her. But now, sitting in that car, those small things she had ignored were no longer quiet. Lauren exhaled slowly. "Grace, you've come this far. If something was really wrong, you would have known earlier, right?" Grace didn't answer immediately, because deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. There were moments, small ones at first, things she noticed but brushed aside because they didn't seem big enough to matter. Like the way Daniel would get unusually irritated when plans changed, even slightly. One time she had to reschedule dinner because of a last-minute work issue, and his tone shifted in a way that caught her off guard, not loud, not aggressive, but sharp enough that she felt it. He apologized later, said he just had a stressful day, and she accepted it because it seemed reasonable. Then there were the inconsistencies in his stories, small details about his past that didn't always line up the same way when he talked about them. The first time she noticed, she thought she misheard him. The second time, she questioned it briefly, but let it go when he laughed it off. Lauren watched her closely. "Grace, what are you thinking right now?" Grace swallowed hard, her voice quieter this time. "There were moments, things I didn't question." Lauren leaned in slightly. "Like what?" Grace hesitated, then continued. "He doesn't like when I ask too many questions. He says I overthink things, that I should just trust him." Lauren's expression shifted, more serious now. "And that didn't bother you?" Grace shook her head slowly. "It did, but I told myself I was just being careful because of my past." She paused, her grip tightening again. And there was something else. Lauren waited. Last month, I saw a message on his phone. It wasn't anything obvious, just a name I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he got defensive, really defensive. Then later, he said it was just a colleague and that I embarrassed him by even asking. Lauren leaned back slightly, processing that. Grace. The car slowed further as they got closer to the church, and the reality of the moment pressed in harder. Grace looked ahead again, her heart racing. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that no one is perfect, that after everything, this was finally it. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't want to lose it. Lauren reached for her again, her tone softer now, but more grounded. Grace, listen to me. Wanting something so badly doesn't make it right. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she whispered. Then why does it feel like I'm about to lose everything? Lauren didn't answer immediately, because she could see this wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something Grace herself was only beginning to understand. The car came to a slow stop just a short distance from the church entrance, and everything went quiet. The driver turned slightly. We're here. But Grace didn't move. Her chest tightened again. That same feeling rising stronger than before, clearer now, harder to ignore. Lauren squeezed her hand gently. Grace, talk to me. What is it? Grace shook her head, tears slipping down her face as she whispered, I don't think I can do this. Lauren's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't panic. She stayed calm. Okay, that's all right. Just breathe. You don't have to rush. Grace looked at her, her voice breaking. Lauren, what if this isn't fear? Lauren held her gaze. Then what is it? Grace hesitated, her voice barely audible now. What if this is God trying to stop me? The question settled heavily between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The church doors were just ahead, people moving inside, unaware of the decision unfolding just outside. Grace's phone lit up again in her lap, Daniel's name flashing once more, and this time, she didn't even look at it. Her breathing grew heavier, her thoughts racing as everything she had ignored began to surface all at once. Lauren watched her carefully, her voice steady. Grace, whatever you decide right now, I'm with you. Grace closed her eyes, that same word echoing again in her mind, clearer than ever. Wait. And in that moment, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't the first time she felt it. The closer Grace Adams moved toward the wedding, the harder it became to ignore what she had been quietly pushing aside for weeks. And sitting in that car beside Lauren, with the church just ahead and everything waiting on her next move, those thoughts no longer felt distant or unclear. They felt present, sharp, and impossible to silence. She leaned her head back slightly, her voice low as she spoke, almost as if she was finally admitting something she had been holding in for too long. Lauren, that dream I told you about, it didn't stop. Lauren turned toward her immediately. What do you mean it didn't stop? Grace swallowed. It kept coming back. Same thing every time. I'm stuck in this room. No windows, no doors I can open. I'm trying to get out, but I can't. And then I hear something, like a door slamming somewhere behind me, and a voice just says, run. Lauren's expression shifted, concern settling deeper now. Grace, why didn't you tell me it was that serious? Grace shook her head slightly. Because I didn't want it to mean anything. She let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening again around the fabric in her lap. I told myself it was just stress. You know, wedding pressure, overthinking. But it didn't feel like that. It felt real. Lauren didn't interrupt this time. She just listened. Grace continued, her voice steadier now, but heavier. And it wasn't just the dream. She hesitated for a moment before adding. During one of our counseling sessions, Pastor Mark stopped mid-sentence. Like he was about to say something, but didn't. I saw it. He tried to brush it off, but it fell off. Lauren frowned slightly. Did you ask him about it? Grace shook her head. No. I didn't want to open something I wasn't ready to hear. Lauren leaned back, exhaling slowly. Grace, that's not nothing. Grace nodded faintly. I know. And then you said it too. Lauren looked confused for a second. Said what? Grace met her eyes. That something didn't feel right. Lauren went quiet, remembering. Yeah, I did. Grace looked down again. I laughed it off, but it stayed with me. Every time things got quiet, I kept hearing it. The car felt smaller somehow, the air heavier as everything they were saying began to connect in a way neither of them could ignore anymore. Grace shifted slightly in her seat, her voice dropping even lower. And then there was that night I prayed. Lauren leaned in again. What happened? Grace took a breath. I asked God to give me peace. To confirm everything was right. I was tired of feeling unsure. She paused, her eyes unfocused for a moment as she replayed it. And for a second, everything went still. Like really still. I thought, okay, this is it. This is where I'll finally feel peace. She swallowed. But instead, I heard one word. Lauren's voice softened. What word? Grace's lips parted slightly. Wait. Silence filled the car again, thicker this time. Lauren didn't rush to respond. Grace, she said carefully. That doesn't sound like something you just imagined. Grace nodded slowly. I know, but I told myself it was just me. That I was scared. That I was about to ruin something good because I couldn't get out of my own head. She let out a quiet, shaky breath. So I ignored it. She turned slightly toward the window, watching the blurred lights from the church ahead. But even after that, things didn't feel right. Lauren's voice was steady now. Like what? Grace didn't hesitate this time. Daniel gets controlling. Not all the time. But when something doesn't go his way, you can feel it. Lauren's brows furrowed. Controlling how? Grace answered honestly. He doesn't like being questioned. If I ask about something that doesn't make sense, he shuts it down. Says I'm overthinking. That I should just trust him. She paused, then added. And sometimes his stories don't line up. Small things. Like where he was, who he was with. It changes slightly depending on when he says it. Lauren leaned back, processing everything. Grace, that's not small. Grace nodded faintly. I know that now. Her voice softened again. And that message I told you about, the one I saw on his phone? Lauren nodded. Yeah. Grace continued. I asked him about it, and he got defensive immediately. Not just annoyed, defensive. Then later, he said it was just a colleague and that I embarrassed him by even asking. Lauren shook her head slightly. That's not normal. Grace's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was less confusion in them, more clarity, even if it was painful. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that no one is perfect, that after everything, this had to be it. She looked at Lauren, her voice breaking. I didn't want to start over again. Lauren reached for her hand firmly this time. Grace, starting over is better than settling into something that's wrong. The car had now fully stopped, the church just steps away, people moving inside, unaware of the weight of what was unfolding just outside. Grace looked ahead, her breathing uneven again, but this time it wasn't just fear, it was realization catching up with her. Am I overthinking, or is God speaking? She whispered, almost to herself. Lauren didn't hesitate. Grace, if you're asking that question this strongly, you already know the answer. Grace closed her eyes again, and this time the feeling didn't come quietly. It came stronger, clearer, undeniable. The dream, the pause, the warning, the voice. Everything aligned in a way she could no longer separate or explain away. Her chest tightened as tears slipped down her face. I can't do this, she said again, more certain now. Lauren nodded immediately. Then don't. There was no hesitation this time. Grace reached forward, her voice steady despite everything she felt. Can we please drive? The driver glanced in the mirror, then nodded. Of course. And just like that, the car slowly pulled away from the church, from the moment everyone expected her to step into, from the life she thought she had been waiting for. Grace leaned back, her body trembling as everything she had been holding in finally released, tears falling freely as Lauren held her hand, without saying a word. Hours later, the weight of that decision still sat heavily with her, but now it was mixed with something else, something she couldn't yet fully name. Her phone had been ringing non-stop, messages piling up, questions she wasn't ready to answer, but she ignored all of it, sitting in silence as she tried to make sense of what she had just done. Lauren stayed with her, not pushing, not questioning, just present. Then her phone rang again, and this time, Lauren glanced at the screen before handing it to her. Grace, you should take this. Grace hesitated, then answered slowly. Hello. The voice on the other end didn't waste time. It was urgent, serious, different from anything she had heard before. Grace's expression shifted as she listened, her body going still, her breathing slowing as each word settled in. Lauren watched her closely. What is it? She whispered. Grace didn't respond immediately. When the call ended, she lowered the phone slowly, her eyes unfocused as the reality of what she had just heard began to settle in. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Daniel. She paused, swallowing hard. He's been seeing someone else for months. Lauren's eyes widened. What? Grace nodded slowly, tears forming again. Not just that. She said he promised her the same things. Marriage, a future, everything. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and undeniable. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she whispered the words she couldn't stop thinking about. If I had walked down that aisle. She couldn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. The weight of it was already clear. She sat there, her thoughts racing through everything she had ignored, everything she had questioned but pushed aside. And as the pieces finally came together, one memory surfaced stronger than the rest. Her eyes slowly closed again, and this time, she didn't fight it. Then she remembered the dream. The days that followed felt unreal for Grace Adams, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, unsettling way life sometimes shifts after a moment that changes everything. The apartment she once loved now felt unfamiliar, like she was walking through a version of her life that no longer fit. Lauren stayed with her the first 2 nights, not saying too much, just being there, making sure Grace ate, reminding her to rest even when sleep didn't come easily. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, Grace stared at the wedding dress still hanging near the door. I can't even look at it, she said softly. Lauren followed her gaze. You don't have to, not yet. Grace let out a weak breath. I was supposed to wear that today, stand in front of everyone, and say yes to a life that wasn't even real. Lauren didn't rush to fix it. You didn't say yes, she replied gently. That's what matters. Shame didn't hit Grace all at once. It came in waves, showing up in small thoughts that stayed longer than she wanted them to. The unanswered messages, the missed calls, the people who had shown up expecting a wedding and left with questions. One afternoon, she picked up her phone, scrolling through the notifications before dropping it back on the table. They probably think I lost my mind, she muttered. Lauren shook her head. Or, they think something serious happened. Grace gave a faint, tired smile. Something serious did happen. But the truth was, even knowing she made the right decision didn't stop the internal questions. She sat at the edge of her bed later that night, her voice barely above a whisper. I almost destroyed my life. And this time, she didn't say it out of fear, but out of realization. Her faith felt different now, not gone, but stretched in a way she didn't fully understand. The conversations she had with God were more honest than they had ever been, less polished, less filtered. One evening, sitting on the floor beside her bed, she spoke quietly. Why didn't you make it clearer? Her voice cracked slightly. Why let me get that close? Lauren, who had been in the kitchen, paused when she heard her, but didn't interrupt. Grace continued. I asked. I prayed. I thought I was doing everything right. The room went still after that, the kind of silence that forces you to sit with your own thoughts. And for a moment, it felt heavy again, like she was back in that space of not knowing. But the shift didn't come all at once. It started in small reflections, moments where she wasn't trying so hard to understand, just remembering. A few days later, she and Lauren sat at the dining table, cups of tea growing cold between them. Do you remember that night I told you about the dream? Grace asked suddenly. Lauren nodded. The one where you couldn't get out? Grace exhaled slowly. Yeah, I thought it was just anxiety. She paused, then added, but it wasn't just the dream, was it? Lauren shook her head gently. No, it wasn't. Grace leaned back slightly. There was the counseling session. Pastor Mark hesitated. You felt something too, you said it. Lauren met her eyes. I didn't know how to explain it then, but I knew it didn't sit right. Grace nodded slowly. And that night I prayed. Lauren finished softly. You heard wait. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was reflective. Grace stared down at her hands. It wasn't silence, was it? Lauren shook her head. No, you just didn't expect the answer to come like that. Grace let that sit for a moment, then nodded faintly. I kept asking for peace, but I was ignoring the warning. Lauren leaned forward slightly. Grace, you didn't ignore it completely. You listened when it mattered most. Grace looked up at her, and for the first time in days, something in her expression softened. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it changed how she carried it. The dream wasn't random. The hesitation in counseling wasn't meaningless. The unease, the questions, the words she heard in prayer, it all pointed to something she had almost stepped past. And slowly, piece by piece, it began to make sense in a way it hadn't before. One evening, Sitting by herself with the lights dimmed, she finally said it out loud, not as a question, but as a realization. God didn't fail me. He saved me. The words didn't feel forced. They felt settled, like something she had finally caught up to emotionally. The tears came again, but they felt different this time, not heavy with confusion, but lighter, almost releasing something she had been holding on to. She leaned back, wiping her face as she whispered, "Every no, every delay, every silence was protection." And for the first time, she believed it without needing to question it. The years she once saw as being overlooked began to look different, not like lost time, but like time that kept her from rushing into something she wasn't meant to carry. Even now, as painful as the situation was, she couldn't ignore the truth that she had been stopped at the exact moment it mattered most. "I wasn't being ignored. I was being guided," she said quietly, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice. The same voice she once questioned, the same feeling she tried to explain away, it had been consistent all along. She just didn't recognize it in the way she expected. And now that she did, everything felt clearer, not perfect, but grounded in a way she hadn't experienced before. In the weeks that followed, Grace began to rebuild, not by rushing into something new, but by returning to herself in a more honest way. Lauren noticed it first. One afternoon, as they walked back from a short grocery run, she glanced at Grace and smiled slightly. "You're different." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Lauren shrugged lightly. "Calmer. Not pretending anymore." Grace thought about that for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally stopped trying to force things to make sense." Her relationship with God felt more personal now, less about getting immediate answers and more about trust, even when things didn't look clear. She still had questions, but they didn't control her the way they once did. And when people eventually asked what happened, she didn't rush to explain everything, but when she did speak, her words carried clarity instead of confusion. "I didn't lose anything," she told one of her friends during a quiet conversation. "I was protected from something I wasn't meant to walk into." One afternoon, standing near the window of her apartment, she looked outside, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. "The life I thought I lost was the life God was rescuing me from," she said softly, almost to herself. And this time, it didn't feel like something she was trying to believe, it felt like something she knew. When she thought back to that moment in the car, sitting beside Lauren, the tension, the fear, the uncertainty, it no longer felt like weakness. It felt like intervention at the exact moment it was needed. Grace Adams would later look back on that day with a clarity she didn't have in the moment, understanding that sometimes things don't become clear at the beginning, and they don't always make sense while you're in them. Sometimes, the understanding comes after, when you can finally see what you were being protected from. Because when God steps in at the last moment, when everything is on the line, it leaves no room to doubt what just happened. And for Grace, that moment in the car wasn't just a decision, it was direction. Sometimes God waits until the last moment, so you'll never doubt it was Him. Have you ever felt like God was silent, but later realized He was protecting you? Grace Adams' story is a reminder that the moments we question the most can carry meaning we don't immediately understand. Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this message spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this.